people need to sweetly and kindly contact the judge, say, Judge, please, do not allow this to go forward. This is a travesty of justice. This is an embarrassment to our American system.
Since 2005, the IRS has grabbed more than $240 million from bank accounts. Some of the owners are entirely innocent of any crime. How do they do this? Through civil forfeiture and structuring. Civil forfeiture gives government the power to take property suspected of involvement in a crime, even if the owner hasn't been charged with a crime. Structuring is when a person deposits or withdraws money below $10,000 to evade a federal law that requires banks to report transactions larger than $10,000. It was originally used to fight organized crime and money laundering, but increasingly, people who are not structuring and are entirely innocent of any crime are caught in the IRS's structuring forfeiture net. Here are a few facts from the report. From 2005 to 2012, the IRS seized more than $240 million from suspected structuring violations in more than 2,500 cases. Structuring-related seizures are growing more frequent. In 2012, the IRS initiated more than 5 times as many such seizures as it did in 2005, yielding a 166% increase in forfeiture revenue. At least a third of the IRS's structuring-related seizures arose out of nothing more than a series of transactions under $10,000 with no other criminal activity alleged by the government. People whose money is seized usually face a long legal battle to win it back, if they get it back. The average forfeiture for suspected structuring took nearly a year to complete. For even more information, check out our report.
Civil asset forfeiture is really a mechanism by which the state and federal government can seize people's property without having to convict them of a crime. Most people can't afford to hire a lawyer to challenge it. It's really legalized robbery by law enforcement.
And think about it, that is a tough crime to report to the police. Give me a description of what the guy looked like. Well, to be honest, he looked a lot like the guy currently asking me what the guy looked like. And if you think this sounds bad, just wait until you see how it looks. Because the Washington Post recently published a major investigation featuring stories like that of this man, who was driving from Michigan to San Francisco with $2,400 in cash that his dad had lent him to start a new job, when he was pulled over in Nevada.
I gave him my license and registration, and then as he was looking at that information, he asked me how much money I was traveling with.
Lee told him about the money his dad gave him, which he kept in the trunk.
He told me to turn on my air vents on high and roll up my windows and get out of the car because he was going to run a canine around it.
Dove didn't find drugs, but he did find the $2,400.
He said, no, I'm going to keep the money because I've concluded through my investigation here that you are traveling from Michigan to California to purchase drugs.
Wow. I mean, there is so much wrong there, including the fact that any policeman who genuinely believes you need to travel from Michigan to California to purchase drugs needs to be introduced to the concept of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. OK? It's right there. And the problem is, stories like that are surprisingly common. In fact, since 9/11, under just one program, police have taken $2.5 billion in the course of over 61,000 seizures of cash alone from people who, and this is the mind-blowing part, were not charged with a crime. But these civil forfeiture laws have warped law enforcement priorities and perception, and nowhere is that more clear than Philadelphia.
Philadelphia officials over a 10-year period have seized more than 1,000 houses, about 3,300 vehicles, and $44 million in cash and civil forfeitures.
Holy shit. Usually when someone describes something taking 3,000 vehicles and 1,000 houses, they're talking about a fucking hurricane. Now, one of those houses belongs to the Soravelis family, and the reason for that seizure seems a little harsh from the outside.
Police arrested their 22-year-old son Yanni on drug charges, $40 worth of heroin, and claim he was selling drugs out of the home. Police and prosecutors came armed with a lawsuit against the house itself.
Exactly, because remember, the parents aren't on trial, the house is, which is clearly ridiculous. Once their house was seized, The Soravellises got to experience the final problem with civil forfeiture. Recourse can be incredibly difficult.
Here in Philadelphia, if you have your property taken, you can come here to City Hall and go to courtroom 478 and try to get it back. Problem is, the people that are taking the belongings are also the ones calling the shots inside the courtroom. The Soravellises showed up to courtroom 478 ready to plead their case to a judge. Instead, they say they faced a prosecutor from the DA's office.
That's right. Their first step in challenging the police seizing their property was in a courtroom without a judge hearing their case. How can you even still call that a courtroom? If you take all the doctors out of a hospital and replace them with otters, that's no longer a hospital. It's better, it's much better, but it's not a hospital. I don't know what, I love it, but it's not a hospital. In fact, recourse is so difficult that most people who've lost stuff to civil forfeiture just choose to walk away rather than fight. So at this point, it should seem obvious that the bad may be starting to outweigh the good with civil forfeiture laws. So we've really got two choices. We can take a hard look at reforming them, or, at the very least, we need to reform our network cop dramas to make them a lot more representative of what is actually happening.
New reaction from some of the small business owners targeted by an IRS law that is designed to catch criminals. The IRS permitted to seize bank accounts without a warrant and without even filing any criminal charges. But now some of these innocent Americans affected say that it has taken a big toll on their lives. And how could it not?
I had to scramble. I had to borrow. I had to beg. I had to put money on my credit cards. Things I've never done before. It's been a year from hell.
No doubt. That is one of the clients that is represented by Larry Salzman in this case. He is with the Institute for Justice. Larry, welcome. Good to have you here. So this law, just to catch everybody up at home, if you make deposits smaller than $10,000, which many small businesses do across the country because they want to get that cash out of their, the business and put it into the bank so it's in a safe place, but that can trigger an IRS investigation, and then they can take the money out of your account on suspicion that maybe you're a drug dealer or maybe you're up to something no good because you're trying to keep it under that 10,000 threshold, correct?
That's right. The problem here are civil forfeiture laws. Civil forfeiture laws allow the government to take your property without charging you, let alone convicting you of any crime based upon a mere suspicion that your property is involved in crime.
So they could take tens of thousands of dollars based on these small deposits and just say, sorry, you put up the red flag, you should have put in $12,000 and filled out the government form. I think this is absolutely unbelievable to people who hear this story. Why don't they need a warrant? Why don't they need to say to you, what are you up to?
Well, they do get a warrant, but it's what's called an ex parte warrant. So it's only the government side that tells their story to the government, and then they seize the money. The problem is they're not doing any serious investigation in these cases before they're grabbing the funds. And with the civil forfeiture laws, what that means is that you might wait up to a year or more, in the case of one of our clients, it's 2.5 years, before you can see a judge to challenge that seizure. It's just outrageous, and that's why civil forfeiture needs to end.
It is outrageous. Do any of these people get their money back?
Well, a lot of people simply can't afford to fight because the way these laws work is they seize the money and then you have to go up against the government, the full might of the Department of Justice in federal court to prove your own innocence to get your money back. For most people, that's just not possible. They can't hire a lawyer and pay them for the amount of money that's being seized, so they walk away from their property or they're coerced into a settlement.
So now they're saying that, they're going to curtail, they've announced that they will curtail the practice. This is after the front page New York Times story. Suddenly the IRS says, we're going to curtail this practice, and we're going to focus on cases where we think there might be some criminal wrongdoing. Gee, that's a good idea. Why didn't they think of that before?
Right, that would help, but inexplicably they've said it's not going to apply to cases that are currently going on, such as...
Yeah, they already have their money. They don't need to do that, right?
That's right. And so really it's an acknowledgement that for years they've been using civil forfeiture laws to take money from people that have done nothing wrong, which is what happened to Carol that you just saw there, and the Institute for Justice's other clients, the Hirsch family on Long Island.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary when you look at the debt in this country, that, you know, we're taking money from people who are just trying to run their own business and aren't doing anything wrong, and we still find ourselves enormously in debt despite the fact that we're actually taking money from individuals in this country. It's really an unbelievable story. Larry, thank you very much. Keep us posted on this one, will you?
Thank you.
Head scratcher.
Hi, friends. This is Coach Dave Daubenmire at newswithviews.tv at newswithviews.com. Thanks for tuning in today. You know, I just returned from Pensacola, Florida with a group of friends of mine, and we went down to stand with our friend, Dr. Kent Hovind, who's on trial in Pensacola, Florida, for the charge of mail fraud. I think it's important that I give you a little bit of information that's certainly been misreported in the press. And anytime you do a Google search or anything like that on Dr. Hovind, the wrong information comes up. Let me make this very clear. Dr. Kent Hovind has served 100 months in jail, not for tax issues. You'll do a Google search and they'll say that he's a tax protester or a tax evasion or whatever. Dr. Kent Hovind has spent 100 months in jail, 8.5 years, for the issue of structuring. And just recently, the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, John Koskinen, just came out and issued an apology to Americans all across the spectrum for having misused the idea of structuring in seizing bank accounts. If my recollection is correct, it was like 127 people across America last year who had their bank accounts seized because of charges of structuring. So it would be important for us to understand what structuring is. It was a policy that was put in place to help law enforcement deal with drug dealers who were trying to launder money. And the law said that anytime a cash deposit of $10,000 or a cash withdrawal of $10,000 was made, it had to be reported to the IRS. Well, people began to get around that by taking out less than $10,000, maybe $9,500, which is what Dr. Kent Hovind did. Now, there's nothing illegal about doing that. It is his own money. He would go to the bank and he would take out the money, $9,500 a week, maybe, and pay the people that he owed money to, pay the expenses of their ministry, of the people who worked for him, instead of having to do 1099s or whatever was involved with that. Well, the IRS put together this policy based on structuring, put in place specifically for drug dealers, and that is what they charged Kent Hovind with, was structuring, not tax evasion. He never evaded any taxes at all. And then to top it off, folks, after Kent Hovind, over a period of several years, took $9,000 a week out of his bank account to pay his bills, he didn't stuff it in a pillow or under a mattress. It was his money that the ministry had earned. After Kent Hovind had amassed about $434,000 in withdrawals over the period of time paying his bills, the IRS said, listen, because that money was involved in structuring, that money belongs to us. And they tried to seize $434,000 from Dr. Hovind. And of course, he didn't have $434,000 because why? They'd spent it. They'd paid it. They weren't trying to hide anything from anybody. So Dr. Hovind, when he was put in jail, then they went about the idea of trying to seize the property to come up with the $434,000. And what Dr. Hovind is on trial today, folks, he is not a tax protester or a tax evader. What Dr. Hovind is on trial today for, and I consider it piling on, is what they called mail fraud from jail. Now, what he did was a perfectly legal action, filing court actions from jail. He's done that for the 8 years he's been in there, trying to get himself free. He filed a motion whereby he put into the file of his properties a legal document saying, listen, this property is still being contested. This is not a free and clear property. And so when they would do a title search, someone wanted to buy his property, they'd do a title search. This letter would be in there saying, listen, there's some debate as to who owns this property. Buyer beware. You're buying some property that's still in dispute. Perfectly legal that he did it.
I think people need to sweetly and kindly contact the judge, say, Judge, please, do not allow this to go forward. This is a travesty of justice. This is an embarrassment to our American system.